time of turmoil and change, a time of uncertain transition. A new way needed to be born, for the way things had been for the past 8 years was progressively making a turn for the worse. This winter was a time where communication all but ceased in the land of Takaupununat. The elders no longer spoke. The seers no longer saw. An illness of unknown source, known collectively simply as the Heaviness, drew out the life of folk in the village. It's precisely this winter that the story of the silent wolf must be heard and told. Sivkersok was a shaman's daughter, but she differed from her father Ava very much. You see, instead of the gift of sight and flight, she was a grounded being, in tune with her instincts, her senses, and the vastness of her beautiful and mighty land. She belonged to the guides, the most astute and attuned of earthbound humans. There she lived, trained, and worked since the age of 17. Today, 11 years later, in her body and gut, she was more attuned than ever to the pains of the central village, as she roamed the mountains, tundra, sea ice, and glaciers to the east. You see, Sivkersok was no ordinary guide. The grueling tests of agility that all guides went through on their training were for her things to do for fun. And from an early age, this was so. Handstands, headstands, crouching jumps, and stone kicks were more fun than chatting. Crouching, rolling, and wrestling were more fun than walking, sewing, sitting, or drinking. Her love of movement and agility saved her life more than once. You see, instead of suffering her grandparents' fate, she survived an instance in her 21st year when an ice floe broke off by jumping with supreme precision and utmost lack of hesitation back onto the main ice. Her feats were remarkable. She became the third person ever to cross the Great Glacier from North Island to the mountainous Albermere mainland, once by snowmobile, once by dog sled. She earned her nickname on one occasion, the only time she felt anything resembling her father's talent germ in her. Always being fond of wolves and foxes, she trapped out of necessity for fur. But one day a wolf in her trap spoke to her. Startled, Sivkersok went straight to set the soul free, but the wolf there stopped her. "You have caught me. I am yours to take." The girl, 23 at the time, approached the calm wolf with axe and boot, but the animal added one request of her. "Tell me, girl, in your own words, what about you allows you to catch me? And don't just say that you're a skilled hunter or trapper, or worse, that you are not a skilled hunter or trapper and that you are just lucky. What about you, Siv, lets you succeed out here?" She thought for a good minute about the question and then answered, "I am healthy. I am stealthy. And I am wild." "Indeed you are," said the wolf, and with that the animal smiled and accepted his fate. His fur would make a parka that Siv would wear for the rest of her life. The guide would be the leader of all the guides that were stationed in the eastern lands and what remained of their settlements, and she would lead them as an alpha wolf leads its pack. She was fierce against those who blocked her way. She was so very playful with those who had earned her trust, and to those she really appreciated and loved. She was so funny that she would burst open their spirit with laughter and joy. For all this noise, though, she proceeded on the land in silence, fully grounded, yet light-footed, stealthy yet earthy. One thing that Sivkersok was not was afraid of the mountain wanderers, those called the Heaviness, and their master, the great one who left. This was the spirit who ruled those who were removed from society and sent, willingly or otherwise, to roam the mountains. For the past 8 years, people had been speaking fearfully about the savage creatures and about the wild soul that breathes them and inspires them. Folk wanted to abandon the nomad's life and live only in the village, out of fear for these exiles, humans whose names were removed, souls who vibrated with the call of the mountain beasts, tundra whales, and the refuge of whatever stubs of forest grew. No, 8 years ago, Siv chose the opposite path. After losing her beloved grandparents, the ideal hunter-seamstress couple, she returned to their ancestral hunting lands to set up her guiding activities there. And in the deep mountains, fearless of the killer, desocialized folk turned monsters, Heaviness and the great one who left, others joined Siv. The guide pack grew, and Ungilatahi, chieftain of all of the guides in the land, knew her skill. Her boss let Siv and Siv's people be. At 28, she learned by way of radio from her aunt, Akinisi, chieftain of modern communicators, that her father, the mightiest seer of seers, was beset with the heaviness, as were all other shamans. Healing seemed impossible. The radio waves worked wonders, but those always destined to travel, see, and communicate were blocked. Now Sivkersok was a loving soul to her family and to her people, but she was not one who shined when she was required to dwell in pain and grief and loss with others. If all the village fell apart, she would stay in the east, hunting, guiding, living, and moving. Movement was her remedy for heaviness and stuckness and all other kinds of no goodness. She stayed in the east, patrolling from Lake to Strange Stone to Sikutsiak nearly every day. But if the seer sickness was one thing she didn't know, a feeling came that she couldn't ignore in her body and not in her mind. Squatting, rolling, stretching, and crawling in one of the guide's cabins in the east with her mates, she felt the presence of two peculiar guests in her land. It was a couple from Piraswalarivik, or Gorland, as its folk called it. As she felt it, her radio sounded again. Again spoke her aunt, Ava's little sister, Aki, who was but 10 years Sivkersok's senior. These guests are on a peculiar journey, niece, and must have counsel from one of our land who sees. Your father sees no more, I know, but the journey is related to grave news on the world scene. The great leader of Hakarevik, or Yorki, as we communicators call him, seeks to influence all the world. He seeks to impose his ways, his new and mighty ways, on all of the world. We know now that war is brewing. These two travelers are on a path to avoid treachery for the whole planet. Is it so, Aunt? Indeed, Sif spoke Akinisi, and what they seek pertains to our troubles too. They travel towards the ancient temple across the glacier to rediscover ancient communication ways before destruction happened. We owe it to them, we owe it to us, to try to bring him back one last time. Siv was already stepping into her wolfskin pants and extinguishing her stove. Say no more, Aunt. I feel it in my body too. This is something for the ages. Neither of us are healers, but there is something bigger at play, and it has been at play for years. I will do my best to heal my father, if you will do your best to heal your brother. Land and air, you and me are. We will bridge a gap, make a path from the ancients to today without the treachery of war, without falling prey to what Yorki's leader is brewing for all the planet. Siv set out for the village, hastily on her snowmobile. Now, it must be said that the silent wolf had a most interesting talent when she was in the company of others. A subtle ability that inspired some and terrified others. When she sat next to someone in that person's energy field, she felt not who they acted as or who they tried to be. Instead, she felt who they were supposed to be and what their potential was. So it was no surprise that when she arrived at the crowded sod house, she felt the energy of the two people from a foreign land the strongest. She entered and shook hands with a frail, thin and fragile father propped up against a chair, hugged her aunt, then shook hands with the two foreigners. "Welcome to the Skralanders," Siv said to the couple, mocking their Gorland accent, and choosing to use the strange term the so-called Gorlanders used to call the people of Takarop Nunat as an attempt at humor. Then she proceeded back to her father. The two travelers were land and air, as announced, guide and communicator. They lacked assurance, though. No. To be more precise, the male, Mikyal was his name. He lacked the assurance of a grounded man of the land at a time where nature was wakening. She, Kolfinna, gave off another need of assurance. It wasn't so easy to pinpoint at the moment, but Siv knew that she would get back to it. The ceremony needed to begin. She removed her parka, her boots, and her wolfskin pants, and began drumming to a steady rhythm. Barefoot on the sod floor of the house that was built, she danced to the sound of her own drumming, and was soothed by the song that her aunt Akinisi sang in her high-pitched voice to accompany her. Land and air were both part of the so-called healing ceremony for the great seer Ava. True to herself, the silent wolf brought all her energy down into the earth and let the earth pulsate back up through her bare-feet legs and back up to her beating drum to make the sound ever stronger still. turned to her aunt, seeing that they were playing off of each other. Then she turned to her father, seeing that he was feeling both of their energies. He was clearly transported somewhere, whether he would be able to communicate where he was at some point later or not. He was elsewhere. He was seeing. He was traveling. As Sivkersok danced and swayed and drummed and moved, the drummer couldn't tell quite what it was at first, but little by little, its steadiness, its steadfast pulsation came back, and the vision was quite clear. Kolfinna was alone in the mountains, but there, the energy that she emitted, that for once Sivkersok was able to see in visions, as she was not normally one who was prone to this type of sight, was frightening, because she was not lost. Kolfinna was not lost alone in the mountains. She had, with the might of all beasts of the mountains crawling around her, howling and growling and grunting and swaying. There were beasts, but there were also people. People who dressed in skins. People whose hair was unkempt. People crawling and rolling and getting full of snow and dirt and mud. People stuck into the mountains. But no, Sivkersok kept drumming and kept listening to the beautiful song that her aunt was singing in her high-pitched voice. Her father was responding to her, to his sister, but especially to Kolfinna, a strange girl from Gorland, from Pigrasoalarivik. The energy rose and rose and rose and rose, and it could be felt by everyone in the tiny sod house. It rose to one final apex, and at that point, it was as if everything let loose in the tiny sod house. Everything was released, and everything blew out an imaginary window out into the howling storm on the other side. Everything calmed. It was time to stop the drumming. But nothing would ever be the same. If there ever was anybody on this earth that needed to have their potential told to them by the silent wolf, it was Kolfinna. She looked her in the eyes squarely and said, "You must know who you are. You are the great one who left. You are the master of the wandering mountain spirits, and you need to accept that. Don't hide from your visions that you are seeing all the time. That is part of you. Accept them. Move with them. Flow with them. That is it. That is who you are. Let it be." But as she was breathing these words in the direction of Kolfinna, who looked very impressed back her way, Sivkersok realized that this ceremony had also been a ceremony for her, for she realized that although she was not a seer in the sense that her father was, she had not seen visions of lands far away and could not travel to retrieve her soul necessarily if it had been lost. She was a person who had a gift, and she was a person who could give healing. She could give the truth, and she gave the truth to Kolfinna and to herself. for it was her responsibility to make sure that Corfina stepped into her potential and realized who she was. Then she turned over to her companion, the guide whose name was Mikael Aldisson, son of Aldis. She said to him, "You are a guide like me, but I was told that you recently led a large group of people from your land on a very trying expedition. Do not sit here as if you are afraid of anything that this land can bring, any beast, anything wild, for the beast and the wild thing is you. Nothing from the land can frighten you because you are the land, just like me. So stand proud, Mikael of Gorland." She breathed those words, necessary, firm, but loving, into the eyes and hearts of both visitors from the foreign land, then looked at her father. "Did we see the same thing, father?" "I'm sure we did, daughter. All the visions we saw were transmitted from the power that this girl has. The great one who left. She must step into that. But she will never be the same. Her name will no longer be Corfina. As she evolves, as she becomes, Mikael will forever seek her out. There's also matters that pertain to our land, to our people. Another journey must be made to accompany these people across the glacier to Sivuliup Nunat, the land that they would call Torval. They will convene with the council to learn the communication in the ancient ways, for if they don't, I have foreseen it. What the leader of Yorki is doing will subdue us all. So fly with them, my daughter. Ride with them across. And the bridge will be built. Communication from the ancient way, the ways of the ancient temple, inserted in the modern towers of the day. That is what is to be done. You know it. Nothing more can be spoken this evening. Let us feast while the storm lasts, and as soon as the weather calms, the three of you shall depart immediately. And so ends what could be called the first leg of the journey of the Silent Wolf, as she realizes that she has a part to play in this journey of bridging the ancient ways to the ways of today. She will be accompanying the foreign travelers across hostile land, and even more hostile thoughts and visions. But guidance there is, and guidance there will be.